Waratahs 2019 season preview. To be fair, 2018 was probably a pretty successful year for the Waratahs. I mean, they made the semi-finals after kind of two pretty average seasons under Daryl Gibson. I had him written off as a coach, and yet they finally managed to pull things together last year. Was that a blip, or will they actually manage to build on that for 2019? It's a good question. I guess we'll have a look at the squad, the fixtures, and a few kind of key questions for the Tars for 2019, and see where we think they're at. So they have lost a few players. Paddy Ryan, I think he's pretty much done with Super Rugby. Hugh Roach has gone to the Rebels. Brad Wilkins gone to the Rebels. Bryce Hegarty's gone to the Reds. Erase Simone has gone to the Brumbies. Andrew Callaway has gone over to England. And probably for me, most importantly, Tangele Naiyaravoro likewise headed over to the Premiership. So he was a huge strike weapon for them last season. So much of their play relied on getting him into space, getting him running at defenders one-on-one, and either setting up tries or scoring a fair few of his own. Was he joint top try scorer? I think he was. So yeah, he was a big part of their success last year, and he is gone. So that's a big thing. But they have brought some players in, so the guys who are remaining, props, you got Angus Bell, Harry Johnson-Holmes, Sekope Kepu, Rory O'Connor, Tom Robertson, Chris Talakai, Shambek Lavui, and Cody Walker. So some of these names obviously a bit more familiar than others. Tom Robertson, I feel like he's still carrying an injury from memory. Sekope Kepu's frontline Wallaby. Harry Johnson-Holmes is a promising player. Vui, we didn't see a whole heck of a lot from memory, but he's another one who's coming along. And then there's a few of these new guys. So Angus Bell, I think he's been signed from a college team. O'Connor and Talakai from the NRC, so I'm not too familiar with any of those three guys. Any insights will be welcome. For hookers, it's Damien Fitzpatrick, Tolu Latu, and JP Sauni. So Fitzpatrick and Latu were kind of your mainstays last season. Fitzpatrick probably unlucky not to even be considered for Wallabies selection. He's been solid, but not doing enough for checks. Latu, on the other hand, was a Wallaby last year. There's also Andrew Tuala, who is playing in the NRC. He's in the squad as well. Locks, Ned Hannigan, everybody's favourite big softy. He's a guy who definitely needs a bit of mongrel about him. There are times when I think he's getting there, and times when I think he's still horrendous. So, yeah, we'll see how he goes this season. Will Harris, Ryan McCauley, LaRue Rhodes, Rob Simmons, Tom Stanley-Forth, Jeremy Williams are the guys listed as locks. So Rob Simmons is another one that everybody loves to hate. Everyone defending him says he's a keen line-out operator, but others would say, again, a bit soft at times, misses a few key tackles. Yeah, we'll see. But then there's Tom Stanley-Forth, who's a big boy, needs to throw his body around a bit more. Roots has been signed up from South Africa. If the pronunciation is poor there, then do forgive me and correct me. Will Harris has been signed from a college team, likewise Jeremy Williams. So interesting if they're going for youth guys, but I suppose they'll just be in the wider training squad for the most part. Loose forwards, Jack Dempsey, BJ Edwards coming from the NRC, Michael Hooper, Will Miller, Hugh Sinclair, NRC, he's been signed from. Rory Sutter, again from the NRC. Lachlan Swinton, Michael Wells, Jed Holloway, and Patrick Tafa, again from the NRC. The loose forwards, you think the Waratahs have got some pretty good depth. I mean, you got Hooper, who's essentially just the Wallaby captain, good number 7. He's gonna compete at the breakdown. That's always welcome. Jack Dempsey adds something there. So likewise, Will Miller. Michael Wells is one of my favourite tackling machines, even if he's not perhaps cut out for Wallaby Gold. Jed Holloway too, so them plus some of these young guys should go pretty well in that department. But yeah, again, a bit of mongrel is probably needed in this Waratahs squad. We'll see if anyone brings that in 2019. Into the backs, Jake Gordon, who is probably my preferred guy for the 9 jersey in Wallaby Gold, although when he played against Italy, he didn't really set the world alight. Phipps in his last year with the Tars before he heads abroad, and Mitch Short. So those are your 3 9s. It'll probably be Phipps and Gordon in and out. 10s, you got Foley, Mac Mason, who's again supposed to do good things. We'll see how much time he gets. And Will Harrison is coming from the NRC. Midfielders, Beal, Fakiti, Alex Newsom, who also plays in the outside backs, and Adam Ashley Cooper is back from Japan. We'll see what kind of legs he's got about him at his age. Still back him because he's one of my traditionally favourite players. Anyone who can tackle 2 guys at once deserves a shout out, and he's that guy. Outside backs, Cam Clark, Ben Donaldson coming from the NRC, John Folau, who I believe is Israel Folau's brother. And from what I've read about him, because I didn't really know anything about him, he's a kind of a failed league player. Signed up for the Waratahs, so apart from the name Folau, I'm not that excited. But again, if anyone has got inside information, do let me know. James Ram coming from the NRC. You got Curtis Rona. It's his last year with the Waratahs as well. He's going abroad. Israel Folau and Carmichael Hunt is coming from the Reds. So again, there's a fair bit of talent. Cam Clark looked pretty good last season. Curtis Rona is a player I like. He's got a bit of bulk about him. Israel Folau is one of the best players in the world. Is he going to be a 15 on the wing or in the midfield? That remains a question, because you've signed Carmichael Hunt, who generally gets deployed at 15. So Daryl Gibson does have options with his backs this year. He is, again, in at coach. We'll see what he's got up his sleeve. He did a smart thing last season with Folau, putting him on the wing, right wing, so he can cut across, because he runs better from right to left at catching the ball from memory. And yeah, he was really able to make some of that kick and chase stuff really miserable for the opposition. And yeah, that seemed to work well. Didn't do it for the whole season, but definitely did it for parts of the season to good effect last season. And then on the left wing, they had Nayo Avoro really just busting things up. So how they deploy their outside backs this year is going to be an interesting question. The schedule, it's a fairly weird one for them this year, because they're not at Allianz. From what I understand, that ground is going to go. So they are at various different grounds throughout New South Wales, Sydney, for the 2019 season. They start off with the Hurricanes at home. That's at Brookvale. They played one game at Brookvale last year against the Blues, and they lost in a game that they played pretty poorly. Then they're away to Japan in week 2 to play the Sunwolves. Week 3, they've got a bye, which is, I suppose, nice that you tie that in with the trip to Japan, because it's a bit of travel. But ideally, you probably want a bit of a better run of games than just 2 before you get the bye. Week 4 is Reds at home at the SCG. They played them at the SCG last season and won. The Brumbies away, and then the Crusaders at home again at the SCG. Then the Sunwolves again in week 7. They're at Newcastle that time. And then they travel to Auckland to play the Blues away in week 8. And then week 9, they have their second bye. So they got both their byes in the first half of the season, and then they've got a run from week 10 to week 18 where they do not get a break. So that stretch is kind of hard. I feel like after such a long preseason, the guys would rather have a big run of like 8 games, and then in the second half of the season, as you've started to pick up injuries, guys are getting tired, there's the travel. Then you spread the buys out kind of, week 8 and week 16 or 15 or something like that. But not to be for the Waratahs this year. Week 10, Rebels at home again at the SCG. Sharks in week 11 at Western Sydney. Then they've got a trip. They got the Bulls and Lions. That's pretty tough in South Africa, because both those games are at altitude. But I suppose if they go straight to the high veld and then stay there, they can adjust to that altitude, so perhaps that will alleviate it at least by the time they play the Lions. Back to Australia to play the Reds away. Jaguares at home at Western Sydney. Rebels away. Brumbies at home at Western Sydney. And then week 18, final game against the Highlanders. Not in Dunedin though, they're playing at Invercargill, so way down the south of the South Island of New Zealand. So I reckon that schedule looks pretty tough. Not that keen on where the buys are at. They don't alleviate any of the travel factor because they're at Australia, the high veld, and then back at Australia, and that's like home, away. I think that's tough. I think they'll need to really make the most of that first half of the season to really push. But the Australian Conference is one where they may not have to get a fantastic record to still get top spot. I mean, last season they were 3rd overall. They would have been 5th on points, but due to the conference system, they managed to go in 3rd. They had 9 wins, 1 draw, and 6 losses. So still a pretty favourable record. Nothing to be kind of looked down upon. It was a pretty good year. But there were a couple of results where they, like that one against the Crusaders down in Christchurch, they could have won that game. That game against the Blues at Brookvale, they should have won that game. So there were a couple of results they let slip through their fingers, and yeah, it could have been a different season if it, if they'd had a home semi, but not to be. So big questions, I suppose, for 2019. How are they going to cope with no home ground? They're all over the shop. So whether that's disruptive or whether it's helpful, I mean, I would have thought it's helpful for players to be playing on that same ground. You know the way it plays. You know exactly how big it is. You get a feel for the dimensions. Helps with your kicking, general like wind direction if it kind of has a trend. All that stuff becomes comfortable, but they don't have that this season. Can they win away outside of the Australian Conference? They didn't manage it last year. All of the teams they beat away from home were either Australian teams or the Sunwolves. So if you're going to be Super Rugby champions, you probably need to be able to do that at some point. Who's going to be their big strike weapon without Naravoro? Because his stats were really, really amazing, and they funneled so much stuff through him. I worry how they're going to go for that X factor without him. I mean, you got Israel Folau, but he's a different style player. You got Curtis Rona, but he's not the same. He could do an imitation, but he needs to be doing his own thing. Can they beat the Brumbies? Because they had a 100% record against the Aussie Conference last year. They beat the Rebels home and away, Sunwolves home and away, Reds home and away, but lost both games against the Brumbies. So the Brumbies potentially could be a challenger for that top spot in the Aussie Conference. So perhaps at least going 50-50 with them will be important, but I suppose we will see. In terms of the bookies, they have got the Waratahs finishing 6th, so good enough for the playoffs, but perhaps not good enough to take it out. How do you think the Waratahs are going to go this season? Anything you're looking forward to? How do you think that schedule is going to affect them? Because I think it's tough, but I suppose it could have its advantages compared to some other teams. It's not easy for anybody. The way Super Rugby is structured, it's a tough competition in terms of travel, but hey, I forgot to mention that they avoid the Chiefs and the Stormers. So those are reasonable teams not to be playing, although if the Stormers had to visit, you'd have to back the Waratahs because they didn't have a very good away record last season either. Chiefs, yeah, you probably don't want to play the Chiefs if you can avoid it, but hey, as I said, if you're going to be Super Rugby champions, you've got to beat them all at some point. So, yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts on how you think the Tars are going to go, and I will talk to you again soon. See you later.